This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 241 of the GardenDC podcast. What if I told you that dead tree in your yard is an indicator of climate change? In this episode of GardenDC, we talk with author and climate activist Mike Tidwell about his latest book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, which is an exploration of global warming's impact on his own home block. The plant profile is on pagoda dogwood, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on bean succession planting by Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Mike Tidwell. He's a journalist, author, and climate activist living in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Welcome, Mike.
Kathy, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on, and we're going to talk all about your latest book, Lost Trees of Willow Avenue. But before we dive into that, Mike, we like to ask our first-time guests here on the GardenDC podcast, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb?
I don't know if I was born with a green thumb. I like to think I have a green thumb. You know, when I was a kid, my dad had a vegetable garden and I wanted nothing to do with it. And he would make me go weed and I just wasn't interested. But then years later, when I moved to Willow Avenue in 1991 in Tacoma Park, Maryland, it was a group house and the person I replaced in the group house said, look, there is a 15 by 15 foot patch of organically grown vegetable garden for the last 10 years, and it would break my heart if no one keeps gardening. And I said, sure. And I subscribed to Organic Gardening Magazine, and really got into it. And I've been growing vegetables ever since.
Excellent. And I know you're a big native plant fan as well.
Yes, I was lucky enough to meet some native plant enthusiasts 20 years ago or so who volunteered to plant my front yard in all native flowers. So we enjoy those from April till November. And yeah, it's been really great.
And I should let our listeners know that we live about a mile apart. I've certainly walked by Mike's place many times. And I think I've attended an open house you had on your green features. You were showing your rain barrel, and was it I want to say a corn burning stove, but I know I'm saying it wrong.
No, that's right. We heated our house for a decade with organically fertilized corn kernels. It was the most economically climate-friendly way to heat my house at the time. We've since switched to heat pumps. We now heat and cool our house with air-sourced heat pumps. But for 10 years, I heated my house with a corn-burning stove. There were about 25 families in Tacoma Park, Silver Spring area. We bought our corn from a Mennonite farmer in Carroll County, Maryland. He would bring it down on his truck, and we bought a corn granary that was in Tacoma Park, and we would load it up on our system, go get your several 5-gallon buckets worth of corn kernels, put them into the hopper in the back of the stove, and an auger would feed it into the flame. And it worked, but eventually we have to stop lighting anything on fire for energy, including organically fertilized corn. So that's when I switched to heat pumps.
What I remember most from that day, Mike, is the sweet smell.
Yeah, it was. It had a wholesome smell of corn, and it was mostly the corn evaporates. The moisture in the corn evaporates while it sits in the hopper next to the fire pit, and that fills the house with a nice sweet corn smell.
It wasn't like popcorn, which would be a great smell in itself, but you just knew it was like something organic, sweeter than wood. So it was a pleasant smell. So you've been involved in climate action with CCAN, it's Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, in 2002, I left my career as a freelance print journalist and formed the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I had become completely alarmed by the science of climate change. I had, at the time, my son was 5 years old, and I couldn't continue to know what I knew about global warming and look at my 5-year-old kid and do nothing about it. So I left this charmed life as a freelance print journalist. I would, walk across Sicily for the Washington Post and go to South America for Condé Nast magazine. I had a great life, but nothing was more important than dealing with this central crisis of our time, climate change. So I formed the nonprofit. We've grown from me and a laptop in my house in 2002 to a staff of 27 across Maryland, Virginia, DC, and we advocate for clean energy solutions to global warming in this region.
Excellent. And so we should talk about your 6 previous books, maybe a quick overview of what you've written about.
Yeah, before I became a climate bore, as my wife calls me, a climate activist, I did write 6 books, including a Peace Corps memoir. I was a Peace Corps in Central Africa in the 1980s. It changed my life. I wrote a memoir about that experience called The Ponds of Columbi, which came out in 1990, is still in print. And then I think the most noteworthy of all my books was a book called Bye Ye Farewell, The Rich Life and Tragic Death of Louisiana's Cajun Coast. Sounds like it, with a title like that, it would have come out after Katrina. It actually came out 2 years before Katrina, predicted the Katrina disaster, and has gotten a lot of readership as a result. But it's just about the coastal tragedy in South Louisiana of disappearing wetlands triggered by human activity, including increasingly sea level rise from climate change.
And so your latest book, Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, and the subtitle is A Story of Climate and Hope on One American Street. And I like that "and hope" part, because between you and me, Mike, I have watched hundreds of environmental documentaries and read probably just as many books, and a lot of them are just flat out depressing.
Well, I won't swear that there's nothing depressing in this new book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, with the title like that. But there is a lot to be hopeful for. But the book begins by just, telling it like it is. And that is, climate change has gotten so bad all over the world that you could take a spinning lacquered globe and take a dart and throw that dart at that spinning globe, and wherever that dart lands, whether it's Japan, Southern Africa, or the 7100 block of Willow Avenue in Tacoma Park where I live, wherever that dart lands, you can write a whole book about the climate impacts, conspicuous impacts, right in that little micro dot. And again, the reason I know that is I've done it with this book. This is a book about the obvious, conspicuous impacts of climate change on one square block.
Yeah, and we're going to parse that out in a little bit. But first, we should tell our listeners, especially those outside of the Mid-Atlantic, where is Tacoma Park, Maryland?
Tacoma Park, Maryland is, if you visualize the District of Columbia as a diamond, we're right at the top of the diamond. It is, the District of Columbia begins at the end of my block. It's literally 300 feet from my front door. We are an old trolley neighborhood of or suburb of Washington, D.C. The part of the town that I live in, the houses are more than 100 years old. And until recently, we had a lot of older trees that were planted in the early days of the 20th century, but are now rapidly disappearing.
And let's talk about those trees. So I have 3 red oaks and 1 white oak. They're all in rapid decline, sadly. I've already lost 1, and those were over 100 years old. And I think you were documenting that same thing just on your block as well.
Yeah, the point I try to make in my book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, is that I've been living on this block for 34 years. And in prior times, if you lived on one street for more than 3 decades, you would definitely see change. You would see clothing fashion change. You would see different automobile models change, babies would be born, some people would move away, change would be visible. But in an era of climate change, in addition to all that, we now see the literal climate changing around us. And I became painfully aware of that in 2022 when the last of 4 massive trees on my block died. Just since 2019, on my block, we've lost 500 years of tree growth. We've lost a 150-year-old southern red oak, a 150-year-old willow oak, a 100-year-old white oak, and an 80-year-old willow oak just in those years. And it's not me saying it's climate change has killed those trees. It's the city arborists of Tacoma Park. It's our public works department. It's the tree care specialists who come to these neighborhoods in the Washington, D.C. area to try to take care of trees and then ultimately remove them. They are pointing to extreme weather linked to climate change as the source of these trees dying. And the point I make in the book is 30 years ago when I moved here, you would have to go to the Great Barrier Reef of Australia or the Arctic to see the early impacts of climate change firsthand. 30 years later, you can see it outside your front door. And that's what I wanted to document in this book. And as I started writing about the trees and trying to tell the story of climate change through the mass tree mortality in this region, I also began to interview people about Lyme disease. More and more people in my neighborhood have Lyme disease. I have struggled with persistent Lyme for 15 years. 3 other people on my block have battled Lyme. It's throughout my neighborhood. And flooding. There's also just rampant flooding, the likes of which no one in this neighborhood has seen, especially starting in the last 5 to 10 years. So I chronicle all those impacts in this one square block, this one microcosm.
And what is climate change doing to trigger that mass tree mortality, as you call it?
Well, in the mid-Atlantic, when I really started to interview the city arborists and entomologists and other tree experts, I said exactly what happened here. And they all pointed to the same thing. They pointed to the year 2018 in the mid-Atlantic. We had record rainfall from New Jersey to South Carolina to West Virginia. The mid-Atlantic portion of the United States just got tons and tons of rain. Maryland got 2.5 feet more rain than normal on an annual basis. And it was triggered by a dip in the jet stream. The jet stream winds are slowing down with climate change, primarily because the Arctic is warming so much and it's causing the winds to slow down. And as a jet stream, that pattern of west to east winds that is usually based in southern Canada, it actually dipped in 2018 all the way to the Gulf of Mexico multiple times. And it brought with it these atmospheric rivers of moisture and dumped it on the mid-Atlantic. And what happened was the soil in the mid-Atlantic regions, including Maryland, where I live, became so saturated, so wet, so waterlogged for so long, it triggered the explosive growth of a mold that's usually latent in the soil in this region called Phytophthora, which translates from Greek to plant destroyer. And that mold gravitated especially to the fine root tips of oak trees, decimated the root tips of our old oak trees here, stressed them out, and eventually we had an infestation of ambrosia beetles throughout this region. In Tacoma Park alone, my small neighborhood, we lost 1,200 trees, mostly spatial giant oak trees. In a 2-year period between 2019 and 2021, we've lost 45 acres of tree cover since 2018, according to city records. So again, not me saying it's climate change, it's the tree experts, but it's changed our landscape.
And it was so drastic, Mike. I remember that same period, of course, was also the COVID shutdown at that same time. And you're walking around the neighborhoods and you're seeing dead tree, dead tree, dead tree, just block after block. And there's these huge old trees. And, there were, of course, city meetings. I remember attending one with an arborist, and they were trying to, at that point, figure it out. Like, it was being blamed on just the ambrosia beetle. It was being blamed on compaction, other things, but they were, to me, all just symptoms of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was dramatic, and at first, because climate change is bringing all these surprises to people all over the world, different signature impacts, whether it's massive coral bleaching in the Caribbean to wildfires in California, in the mid-Atlantic, our signature dramatic impact has been abnormal precipitation patterns. And yes, 2019, 2020, 2021, we saw a really big pulse of tree mortality. And, in Tacoma Park, we call ourselves Tree City, USA. We're obsessed with trees. Most of our streets are named after trees: maple, willow, tulip, dogwood. And this was particularly traumatizing here. One arborist told me when a tree dies in a national forest, it's a number, it's a statistic. When it dies in your backyard, it's a friend. And so in Tacoma Park in the last few years, we now have these remaining tree stumps that are like tombstones that we walk past them like in a graveyard, and we're reminded of our grief, of our friends that have died. And there's just a lot of grieving and sadness in this neighborhood as we experience this signature climate impact.
And what do you say to those folks who might say, well, these oaks came to the end of their lifespan, that they were all going to go anyway? They were all probably planted around that same period of when these houses went in, which is, as you said, around 100 plus 125 years.
It's a valid question. All trees die eventually. These are mostly old, big trees, especially in an urban area. It's tough, but they're all dying at the same time. Again, on my block, they're all old, but there's an age differential. Two of them were 150 years old, one 100 years old, and one 80 years old. And now there's two more that are destined to die in the next few years that are in the 70 to 80-year-old range. One arborist told me, Mike, look, our native trees in the mid-Atlantic are no longer native. We've changed the climate. So now they're foreigners. We shouldn't be surprised that they're getting sick and dying. And one of the questions I ask in the book is, if our native trees are foreigners because we've changed the climate, what does that make us human beings? And the reality is we're becoming foreigners on this planet as well. The stable human civilization that's developed for the last 10,000 years is being undermined by climate change, just like our tree canopy. And we might want to accelerate the switch to clean energy, which I do write about a lot under the hope heading in my book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, that's a lesson for all of us, not just gardeners, to take to heart that, as the climate rapidly changes, it might not be hospitable for any of us to live in. And we gardeners are seeing it literally at the ground level. We're growing things that we weren't 10 to 20 years ago. I'm having things winter over that weren't back then. And I'm also choosing things from a zone south. And I think that's maybe the direction we have to go with some of our tree choices as well, as we replace some of those lost trees.
Well, in December 2023, planted an oak tree in my front yard because oak trees are amazing. One of the things I learned in writing this book is the incredible diversity and abundance of life that oak trees provide in our communities. Oak trees, there's a 150-year-old southern red oak that died on my block, and an arborist told me that up to 1,000 different life forms were probably supported by that oak during its lifetime. Everything from ravens to rat snakes to aphids to all kinds of lichen, and they're just evolved to support more life forms than any other tree genus in North America. So I encourage people to plant oak trees in their neighborhoods. And so when it came time for us to plant one in late 2023, the folks at Casey Trees advised that I put in a swamp white oak. So a tree that's adapted to having wet feet, maybe less well adapted to the droughts. We gardeners not only see the extraordinary rain, but we also see these really sharp 7, 8, 10-week droughts when it doesn't rain at all. So our trees are being stressed out in different ways, but in my neighborhood, at least, a lot more swamp white oaks are being planted.
And I was just joking with a staffer at Casey Trees about wanting live oaks, because I've always wanted one.
I wonder, can they survive here now?
Yeah, he said there's actually a
Oh
couple live
my
oaks in the
God.
city, and I'm like,
My
might
God.
have to get a baby live oak at this point and start it off, get a little sapling, and
Oh
see how
my.
that does.
We can have Spanish moss right here in
Yes,
DC.
that will be the next step. So let's play devil's advocate for a minute, and we're losing all these huge trees, and so what? We'll just say it like that, Mike. Maybe I can put in another solar panel on my roof, or, now I have more sunshine for my vegetable garden. So how do trees and human health connect?
It's a great question, and it's one of the things I learned a lot about as I was writing this book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue. I think most of your listeners have heard about this concept of forest bathing, a Japanese concept.
Mm-hmm.
We know that when we're around big trees, we have a sense of well-being, and it's not just a sense. Our stress levels actually drop. There's a physiological response that comes from being around big trees. Our cortisol levels go down. Our immune systems are boosted. Hospital patients who can see a tree through a window recover faster than patients who don't. There's scientific data supporting that. And trees are just amazing thing. They're just amazing creatures. We think of them as static, but they're not. They're dynamic, and adults try to live near their offspring and share nutrients underground. Trees talk to each other above ground and below ground. They feel pain. They can tell time. They sleep, and they become our friends. And they boost our immune systems. They make us healthier physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And there's all kinds of data to support that. So the question I ask in the book is, if they help us when they're here, what happens to our health when they disappear? And I think that it is affecting our health. I think it's one of the reasons more people are getting Lyme disease in my neighborhood. Not just that the winters kill off fewer ticks, the milder winters kill off fewer ticks, but we also have this lack of the boost to immune system from the trees that I think make us more vulnerable to diseases like Lyme. So I've come to appreciate in writing this book the immense treasure, the immense gift that trees give us in so many ways and so many health functions they provide for us.
So well put. And speaking of Lyme disease, so it comes from a tick bite. You think in your own backyard. And tell me about how Lyme disease in your neighborhood has impacted your other neighbors, as you said, and the increase in the deer population.
Yeah, when I moved to Willow Avenue in 1991, there were a number of things I don't remember ever seeing. I don't remember seeing deer. I don't remember seeing trees dying from invasive vines, which is another issue I talk about in the book. Invasive vines are outcompeting native vines in a high CO2 environment, which is triggered by climate change and the burning of fossil fuels. And I don't remember anyone with Lyme disease. Now, again, I got bit by a tick in 2008. I was in my backyard garden. I was misdiagnosed for 6 years. Lyme disease can be treated if it's caught early. It is much harder to treat when it's not caught early. So I have a condition called persistent Lyme, which I manage with occasional antibiotics and acupuncture and herbal supplements. But I discovered that on my block, 3 other folks on my block who are also gardeners have battled tick-borne diseases. 6 members of my church have had Lyme disease, and a Eagle Scout in our local Boy Scout troop, Troop 33 here in Tacoma Park, was bedridden for 2 years with severe Lyme disease. The Environmental Protection Agency has made it clear now for over a decade that the spread of Lyme disease is related to a warming planet. In fact, they use Lyme disease as one of the measurements for climate change. And deer, while deer don't carry Lyme in their blood, they spread the ticks. They spread as a kind of like rideshare for ticks and helping the ticks permeate every square foot of our yards and our gardens.
Yeah, it's so tragic that so many gardeners I know are suffering from Lyme and other tick-borne diseases. And you want to get out there, you want to be out in the garden, but then it makes people fearful.
Yeah, I have other friends who are gardeners who cope with Lyme, and we are determined that we are not going to allow Lyme disease and climate change keep us from growing vegetables and flowers. And so it's a matter of being protective and wearing long sleeves and long pants, wearing, the right bug spray, and just being mindful, light colored clothes. May is Lyme Awareness Month every year in the United States. And I would just encourage gardeners, wherever you are on the East Coast, especially, protect yourself, check for ticks. Don't give up on your dream of being outdoors. Just be protective.
Good advice. So speaking of your vegetable garden, and so you've been growing edible food for over 34 years on your block on Willow Avenue. What changes have you seen in what you're growing?
I just find it harder and harder to grow vegetables. Part of it too is there were no rabbits here when I moved here 30 years ago. So you have to protect against rabbits. You have to protect against deer. But, it seems like there are more frequent late frosts than we used to have, and late season cold, and then really, really hot summers where a lot of your beans and other vegetables stop giving. They just shut down in the heat. Then the astonishing droughts. The drought we had last fall here was, I think it was 9 weeks without any rain at all. I have a friend who's a farmer in southern Pennsylvania, not far from here, and he says he bought his farm in 1973. He's been farming the same plot of land since 1973. And he said, Mike, in the early 70s, the seasons came almost like clockwork. You knew when the last frost was going to happen. You knew when the first frost was going to happen within 7 to 10 day period. You got enough rain in the spring, not too much. It got dry at the same time for a manageable amount of time in August, September. It was almost like clockwork. And now, there's no clock anymore. It seems like it's too wet, too dry, too cold, too hot all the time in this region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even this past early spring, late winter, I kept having to delay week after week getting those first peas in the ground because, again, too wet, too cold, then another freeze. And I think I planted the latest I ever have just this year.
Yeah, and it's not just our gardens that are feeling it. As I say in the book, it's our trees. But I will say that, in my neighborhood, and this is the hope part of the book, at the same time that we've seen the passing of big trees in my neighborhood, we've seen the coming of clean energy. In my neighborhood, when a big tree comes down, and you alluded to this a minute ago, when a big tree comes down, one of two things happen. Either solar panels go up on that residential roof or that flat roofed commercial establishment. Suddenly there's sunlight, put solar panels up there. Or second, people build gardens. There's a lot more curbside vegetable gardens in Tacoma Park, suddenly backyard gardens where it was previously too shady. And it's not just solar. In my neighborhood, which is admittedly a politically progressive enclave, it's true. I'm sure wherever your listeners are, we see more and more electric cars, that faint harmony of angels, as my neighbor Paula puts it. You hear that coming down the streets in Tacoma Park. We have the first gas station in the United States that switched entirely from pumping gas to charging electric cars. So we've seen that here, and it's worldwide too. Every day around the world, human beings deploy a gigawatt of solar energy every day. That's like a giant nuclear power plant of solar every day. The largest automobile market in the world, China. This year, half of all cars sold there will be electric cars. These are trends that no administration in Washington can stop. They can slow parts of it down here in the United States. But even here, we have the blue states, California, Maryland, New England, upper Midwest, that are continuing to push for clean energy. But again, if climate change has gotten so bad that you can write a whole book about the impacts on one block, then we obviously have to go faster.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Let's talk a little bit about your book and the reception it's had. So I know you've done a few local book readings and talks. How have people reacted to it?
Yeah, I have been very happy with the reaction to the book. I will say that a number of reviewers, a number of people who read the book tell me, Mike, I thought it was going to be boring. You know what? You're writing about your block. I don't want to read about the shrubs on your block and how they're struggling from heat. This book has a very strong narrative. I pride myself in being a writer who tries to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end. There are a lot of things that happen. There are a lot of interesting characters in this book. My Congressman Jamie Raskin is a character in the book. He ran for Congress to fight climate change. While I was writing the book, he was battling cancer, but he was amazingly energetic in his work on Capitol Hill of holding polluters accountable. There's my neighbor across the street, Dorothy, who's a midwife, who she and her husband installed a geothermal system in their backyard 10 years ago. They're totally committed to fighting climate change, and she's just a fascinating character in the book. But one of the most interesting characters is a guy named Dr. Ning Zhang at the University of Maryland, who, like me and arborists across the region, has noticed how many trees have been dying in this region. And he makes the case that if these trees are sent to landfills or they're wood chipped for playground cover, or God forbid they're incinerated, their carbon that they've stored for a century is just vented back into the atmosphere, compounding climate change. So his goal is to bury, literally put into the ground as many trees as he can in low oxygen clay to store that carbon for 1,000 years or more. It's an interesting, scientifically plausible way to store that carbon. He calls it reverse coal. So in the book, I follow him as he tries to cut through government red tape and get trees from Baltimore. He negotiates with a farmer in Cecil County, Maryland, and the book actually ends with us having a burial, a funeral for 100 tons of trees. It recites a poem, and we cry, and it's just a lot of interesting human dramas happen in this book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, and that's what I think people are responding to. It's a staff pick at our most well-known bookstore, Politics and Prose. It got a great review in the Washington Post. So I've been pleased by the reception.
That's great to hear, Mike. And I would say I recognize a lot of the characters as being neighbors that I run into as well. And I love the references to Jamie Raskin, of course, one of our local heroes. And we talked a lot about oak trees and the wonderful services they do for our environment and supporting our wildlife. But you also have a chapter on cherry trees.
Yes, I have a chapter. The book is organized into two parts. The first two chapters of the book are the history of Tacoma Park, the history of climate change in this neighborhood, and my history as a climate activist. So that's the first two chapters. Chapters 3 through 12 are the year I kept a diary about my block during that calendar year, and I record all the conspicuous impacts of climate change on my block. And in the book, there are color photographs of all these dramatic changes, including the wildfire smoke in the summer of 2023. We all of us in this region remember so many trees went up in flames in Canada, and that smoke came down to the mid-Atlantic. On June 8th, 2023, Washington, D.C. had the worst air quality of any city in the world. And I write about those impacts in my neighborhood. But there is a chapter that is March 2023, when the cherry trees come out. And I make the point that when most people think of Washington, D.C. and the cherry blossoms as something unique to D.C., something around the tidal basin, something for monumental downtown D.C. But the truth is, cherry trees are very popular all around D.C., and you can go into the suburbs in March and you'll see these same iconic Yoshino cherry trees blooming. They used to bloom in early April, and when the Japanese government presented them as a gift in 1912, the world was at about 300 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere. Fast forward to 2025, we're at 425 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere. And that's caused so much warming that our cherry trees now here in this region bloom as early as mid-March. And of course, in 2023, they bloom early, but they're gorgeous. And I try to invoke that theme of cherry trees, that ancient Buddhist wisdom that basically revere these cherry blossoms, saying that life is gorgeous, life is fragile, and life is astonishingly brief. And with climate change, we're introducing more fragility, more brevity to the lifespans of trees. And I try to weave those narratives together while also interviewing people like Jamie Raskin, who comes on my block in this incredible scene in the book. And we stand under these Yoshino cherry trees. And he talks about his battle with cancer and his hope for his family in the future and for the planet. And so I try to involve the scenery of this region, how it's changing, how it is such a treasure to have these gardens and these trees around us. We need to protect them, but they're disappearing unless we accelerate our efforts to get off fossil fuels.
And so true that the lesson of the cherry trees is the ephemeral nature of them. And, one of my favorite stages of the cherry trees is when all the pink petals have fallen onto the ground and you have that beautiful snow, so to speak. But it just tells you about the impermanence and, as you said, fragility of life.
Absolutely. In fact, when those cherry tree blossoms start to fall beautifully like snowfall and our cherry trees across this region, it tragically takes the place of the snowfall that no longer falls in March here anymore. It used to be that March was a snowy month in this region. We rarely see snowfall. And I kind of make that argument that the beauty of these cherry blossoms falling remind us that there used to be something called snow that would fall in that month that no longer happens.
Yeah, I recall exactly, Mike, that there used to be a Washington Home and Garden Show at the DC Convention Center, and it was almost always the second weekend of March, and we almost always had snow. Like when I was either on the move-in day or when I had a booth set up that day, there would always be like a light, not a heavy snow, but just enough to cover the ground. And yeah, we haven't had that in years. So let's talk a little bit about maybe your next project. Do you have anything else that you're mulling over or actually started to work on?
It's a good question. I have written 7 books now. I am 63 years old. I wrote my last book 19 years ago when I was 44. And the reason I haven't written one in so long is I've been very busy running a nonprofit advocating for clean energy solutions to climate change, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And I don't know that I have a next book. I will tell you that it took 19 years before it, when you're ready to write a book, it's when you can't not write it, when the idea won't let go of you. And this idea of writing a book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, about my one block, it landed on me in the fall of 2022 and would not let go. And I started writing, in November of 2022, and then I wrote throughout 2023. So I'm very pleased with how the book has turned out, but I can't say that another idea has landed on me and won't let go of me. Maybe one will come. I will say that I'm hoping that this book that I've written brings new awareness of the advanced nature of climate change. We always sort of thought of climate as something happening elsewhere, happening in the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, the North Pole, the sea level rise in places like Bangladesh. But it really is happening right here. My church, a block from my house, Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church, we have struggled to keep water out of our preschool and out of our boiler room from extreme floods. In fact, the city of Tacoma Park spent $45,000 building the equivalent of a flood levee on one side of my church. They busted up a perfectly good sidewalk, brought in 30 tons of soil, elevated that sidewalk, repaved it, but it's basically a flood berm to keep water from Tulip Avenue, from extreme rain, from getting into my church. A lot of people who've read the book are like, okay, you freaked me out. I'm newly attuned to the impacts of climate change. Tell me what to do. Don't give me 10 things to do. Just tell me one thing. What's the most important thing I can do to fight climate change? And I talk about this at the very end of the book. And that thing I recommend to people is always the same. And that is, one, to praise everyone who's made some individual choices. If you've bought a electric car or become a vegetarian or switch to solar power, that's great. But the number one thing you can do to fight climate change is stop being an individual. It's to join a group, join a movement, to maximize your power as a voter, as a neighborhood activist. And to do that, it's pretty straightforward. Simply pick one group in your region who's fighting climate change, whether it's Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Interfaith Power and Light, Sierra Club. There's a new group for people over 60 fighting climate change called Third Act. Just pick one group and develop a relationship with that one group. Make a donation if you can. Get on their email alert list. Learn how you can show up for the rally, contact your mayor when a big vote is happening, things like that. So that's the number one recommendation I make in my book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, is become in relationship with another group fighting climate change.
I think that's great advice. And I'm glad you mentioned Third Act, because that name, to me, I had seen it around, but it was a little nebulous to me. I'm like, with the theater, I know what a third act is.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the third act of your life? So good to hear that defined. And how can our listeners contact you, Mike, or find out more?
Yeah, you can email me at mikewtidwell@gmail.com. I also have a website, www.mike-tidwell.org. So you can visit my website, or you can learn about me from my nonprofit's website, chesapeakeclimate.org. That's chesapeakeclimate.org. And the book is available. The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue is available wherever books are sold. You can buy it online. It's also on Audible, so you can listen to it. And I think, there's never been a book like this before. When I had this idea of writing a book about my block, I Googled around. I found people who wrote a column about climate change in their backyard, but no one had done a whole book. And I think until the last 5 years, it was improbable that a New York publisher would take seriously a book about climate change on one street. But it has reached the point where, St. Martin's Press gladly published it. And I think people are connecting to it because they see similar but different impacts of climate change wherever they live.
And I can see, Mike, that you might have inspired other people to do similar books for their regions and or case studies. Maybe not a whole book, but maybe they might do a blog post or a YouTube video or that sort of thing, chronicling what they're seeing.
I hadn't thought about that. I hope that happens.
So any final thoughts for our listeners, Mike, especially those gardeners, as you said, who are seeing effects of climate change in their own home gardens?
If you're a gardener like me, it can get discouraging, but nothing replaces the joy of fresh vegetables in July and August and wonderful wildflowers in the fall. It is such a rewarding activity. Nothing brings me more relaxation and peace than getting my hands dirty in the soil. But we have to work harder and we have to be more patient. I worry that young people won't take up gardening because they see how hard it is and they see us complaining. I mean, gardeners are always complaining about something, but go out of your way to encourage someone younger to learn about what you're doing. Pick someone to mentor. Be honest about the climate. Make it clear that, yes, it's more challenging today than it was 30 years ago. And make that part of your climate activism is making yourself and others more aware of the challenges. And then again, join a group, be part of a movement so that we can have a planet where we're not foreigners and where our gardens aren't populated by foreign plants that used to only grow when our grandparents were around, but that we can stabilize the climate and maintain that bounty of farmed vegetables and old big trees, just creating a world where not only can the trees grow older, but so can we in a stable climate.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Pagoda Dogwood Plant Profile. Pagoda Dogwood, Cornus alternifolia, is an understory tree that is native to Central and Eastern North America. The branches are held parallel to the ground and have an architecturally tiered look that give it its common name. It has four-season interest with small white flowers in the spring that turn into dark berries in the summer. The foliage is solid green and turns burgundy in fall. There are also variegated cultivars, such as Golden Shadows and Argentea. The berries are loved by birds and small mammals. It's a host plant for the spring and summer azure butterflies. It grows up to 25 feet tall and 30 feet wide at maturity. It's hardy to USDA zones 3 to 7. Pagoda dogwood grows best in part sun to part shade and planted in moist but well-draining soils. This is a low-maintenance plant that does not require fertilizing or pruning. You can mulch lightly around its root zone with leaf compost annually. To propagate it, you can take stem cuttings or sow it seeds. Note that it can seed itself around naturally, so cull any saplings if you do not want it to form a small colony. pagoda dogwood. You can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I was so pleased to see the heirloom rose, the bishop, putting up one single beautiful flower in my garden. Over at the community garden plot, I'm harvesting cilantro, lettuce, and arugula. In our little pollinator strip there next to the community garden, the zinnias and marigold seeds have sprouted. In the garden tips that we shared this week, we focused on growing strawberries and included the tips to control slugs and snails by hand-picking them off your plants and to prevent theft from birds by covering your patch with a wire cage as the berries start to ripen. In local gardening events, on May 19th, this is a Monday evening, the National Capital Orchid Society is hosting a talk by Erica Hanikel. She is the author of Orchid Muse, A History of Obsession in 15 Flowers. And she will be signing and selling her book, as well as giving a talk on the book's topic. This meeting takes place at the North Chevy Chase Christian Church in Chevy Chase, Maryland. You can find out more details about that meeting at ncos.us. And then on Thursday, May 29th at 6:30 p.m. in the evening, the U.S. Botanic Garden is hosting Cocktails and Conversations, Warming Climate, Wilder Weeds. This is a free event at the Conservatory Garden Court, but pre-registration is required at the usbg.gov website. Invasive plants are affected by climate change and efforts to restore natural habitats in and around the District of Columbia, and you'll hear firsthand from the researchers and community change makers leading plant-centered climate change solutions. Come with a curious mind and leave with a renewed sense of hope. And then on Tuesday, June 10th at 11:30 a.m. at Hillwood Gardens, there is a gardener's focus tour, Bounty of the Cutting Garden, and this will be repeated at various other dates and times. You can check the hillwoodmuseum.org website to register for that session or to see the other times. This summer, you can unearth the boundless beauty of the cutting garden and explore sustainable gardening practices at Hillwood. From sunflowers and zinnias to eucalyptus and lisianthus, the weekly harvest supplies a bounty of flowers which are used in arrangements throughout the property. And you can learn about sustainability at Hillwood through insider information about their green initiatives and ecological horticultural practices. And of course, you're going to tour the garden in all its glory and learn a few tips and secrets from a Hillwood gardener along the way. Happy gardening!
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Food Gardening Network with Succession Planting Strategies for Extending Your Green Bean Harvest, an article by Amanda MacArthur. Been there? Done that. With the green bean feast or famine cycle? You know what I'm talking about. The annual garden tradition where you wait forever for beans and then suddenly you're drowning in them faster than you can say, not another bean casserole. Then just as quickly, they're gone, leaving you beanless and bewildered for the rest of the season. Well, fellow bean enthusiasts, it's time to spill the beans on succession planting, the garden technique that's about to revolutionize your relationship with these versatile veggies. Now, most of us are guilty of the plant once and pray approach. We clear a patch, toss in all our bean seeds on that one perfect spring weekend, then dust off our hands and declare, bean mission accomplished. But beans don't care about your schedule, they care about their schedule, which typically involves a concentrated 2 to 3 week production window before tapering off. Mother Nature didn't design beans to produce evenly all season. She designed them for efficiency. Beans want to mature enough fruit to ensure species survival, then put their energy elsewhere. Sneaky, right? So, first solution, succession planting. It's the simple art of staggering your planting so you're not harvesting everything at once. With beans, you've got 3 main approaches. You can use time-based succession planting, based on the calendar candons. This is the classic approach. Plant a new batch of the same bean variety every 10 to 14 days. Here's how to nail it. First, the planting. Then you do the follow-up planting. In the midsummer heat, though, remember to extend the interval to 16 to 18 days in between instead of the typical 10 to 14 days for follow-up plantings. And also remember that the last planting needs to be 60 to 70 days before your first fall frost. Here's a lazy gardener hack. Instead of remembering to plant every 2 weeks, who actually does that, tie your bean planting to another regular event. Bill payment day is bean day, or every other garbage day, plant beans. Your credit score and your bean harvest will thank you. The next approach is variety-based succession, the bean diversity portfolio, if you will. Did you know that different bean varieties mature at different rates? Mind-blowing, right? So go ahead and use this to your advantage. You could use the early season varieties like Contender, and then plant the mid-season varieties like Blue Lake, along with the late-season varieties like Romano. And here's a fun bean fact. Some varieties, particularly heirlooms like Cherokee Trail of Tears, were specifically selected by gardeners for extended harvest periods. These cut-and-come-again varieties will produce over a longer window than modern hybrids that were bred for commercial one-and-done harvesting. Our third approach is location-based succession, or the microclimate manipulations. Your garden has hot spots and cool spots. Use these to your advantage. Warm areas, like south-facing near walls that reflect heat, or in raised beds which warm up faster. You have cooler areas, the north side of tall plants with afternoon shade, or low spots in the garden. And a little piece of garden nerd trivia, the temperature difference between the warmest and coolest spots in your garden can be as much as 15 degrees, which translate to about 7 to 10 days difference in maturity time. Just to put this all together, you can go ahead and become a full bean time manager without a lot of work. So I hope you have enjoyed this. The bottom line to beans, if you're looking for an easy crop that delivers a high yield, plenty of nutrition, and can make a statement in your garden, grow green beans. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.